One of these buildings killed the man who built it. That fact alone should tell you this is not a list about architecture, it's a list about obsession. 13 structures, and not one of them was built the way it was supposed to be. The rules that govern construction, physics, budget, permits, the basic assumption that floors should stay attached to buildings, were not ignored by accident. They were ignored on purpose, or out of madness, or because the person doing the building simply could not stop. A surgeon with no blueprints erected a monument to a navigator he had never met. A 10th century Scottish fortress now has walls covered in psychedelic murals by Brazilian street artists. A Belgian castle with 500 windows stood for centuries, was abandoned for 25 years, and was demolished over the protests of the entire world. Beneath a French chateau lies a complete underground city, stables, bakeries, tunnels, invisible from the surface.
In a Portuguese garden, a tower descends rather than rises, a spiral boring downward into the earth. In the Atlantic Ocean sits a stone fortress that engineers declared impossible for 6 decades before someone proved them wrong. At the mouth of the Thames, rusting steel platforms on stilts once declared themselves a sovereign nation, fired on a Dutch vessel, and survived an armed coup attempt. One structure lost its kitchen mid-storm, the floor gave way, and the cooks fell into the sea. One was carved into a cliff face over an abyss and held off a year-long siege through a network of secret mountain tunnels. One man spent 17 years building his, lived in it for less than 6 months, and died there under circumstances no investigation has fully resolved. Number 13 comes first. Number 1 comes last. What connects all of them is not bad engineering. It is the specific human condition of building past the point where any reasonable person would have stopped. Number 13 on this list is a castle built by a surgeon with no architectural training, no blueprints, and no master plan. And it might be the most honest building on the entire Costa del Sol. That paradox sits at the heart of Calameros Castle in Benalmádena, Spain, and it explains why the place feels like nothing else in the region. From a distance, the structure reads as a coherent medieval fantasy. Towers, battlements, archways layered against a hillside above a busy resort town. Move closer and the illusion fractures. Gothic windows sit directly beside Moorish domes. Byzantine mosaics appear where you least expect them. No two elements share a visual grammar, and the proportions shift from section to section in ways that no trained eye would have allowed. The reason is straightforward. No trained eye was involved. Esteban Martín was a practicing surgeon when he broke ground in 1961. He hired workers, sourced materials, and made every decision himself, building continuously for 7 years without a single architectural drawing. His stated ambition was to create a monument to Christopher Columbus and the discovery of the Americas, though that theme dissolves quickly into the broader chaos of accumulated historical references. What remained when construction ended was a structure of over 1,000 square meters, containing a private chapel measuring just 1.96 square meters, documented by some sources as one of the smallest functioning churches in the world. Inside, Martín assembled antiques, hand-painted ceramics, carved woodwork, and stained glass across decades of collecting. The result is a space that feels like a dream of the Middle Ages, experienced by someone who had only ever read about them second-hand. Calameros opens this list because the castles that follow it carry real history, real violence, real institutional weight. This one carries something rarer, the complete, unmediated vision of a single amateur who simply refused to stop building. A medieval Scottish castle covered in psychedelic graffiti isn't a film set or a publicity stunt. It's a listed historic monument, and the people responsible were invited. Kelburn Castle, number 12 on our list, stands on the southwest coast of Scotland in Ayrshire, and the Boyd family has owned it continuously since 1201. making it one of the oldest permanently inhabited castles in the country. The graffiti you see blanketing its towers isn't vandalism, it was commissioned. In 2007, the Earl of Kelburn brought in 4 Brazilian street artists from Sao Paulo, the Ninja Collective and their collaborators, and handed them a problem disguised as a canvas. Decades earlier, a section of the castle's exterior had been coated in cement render. By the 2000s, that render was considered both visually damaging and structurally unsound. Rather than simply strip it, the Earl offered the condemned surface to the artists. What they produced over several weeks defied every category available. Enormous octopuses, cartoon faces, neon ornaments, and tropical imagery crawled up the medieval stonework from ground to parapet, wrapping 13th century towers in murals the size of apartment buildings. Historic Scotland responded with speed and firmness. The castle held listed status, the intervention was classified as a breach, and officials demanded the historic appearance be restored. The tourists, meanwhile, arrived in numbers that hadn't been seen before. People drove to Ayrshire specifically to stand in front of battlements framed by acid green surrealism. The owners successfully argued for a temporary stay, while the long-term question of the render itself remained unresolved. What makes Kelburn so visually arresting is precisely the absence of logic in what you see. Grey, wet stone under a grey Scottish sky, and then, filling half a wall, a venomous green octopus staring back at you. Our next castle also exists at the border between genuine and impossible, but there, no artists rewrote the history. One man built it entirely alone, without blueprints, high in the mountains of Wyoming. Number 11 on our list is a building where the staircases lead nowhere on purpose. That is not a metaphor, and it is not the result of an unfinished project. It is the original intent. The Smith Mansion, standing in a Wyoming valley, was designed and built by one man, engineer Francis Lee Smith, who started construction sometime in the 1970s and kept going for roughly 12 years without architectural drawings and, reportedly, without nails. He developed his own joinery methods and applied them to a structure that grew taller with each passing year, accumulating balconies, walkways, cantilevered rooms, and terraces that push outward over open air at angles that contradict the basic physics most buildings obey. Inside, staircases dead-end into ceilings, rooms open onto nothing. Certain floors can only be reached by crossing outdoor passages exposed to the elements. The reason none of this reads as error or oversight is that Smith was living here the entire time, continuing to build, adjusting and extending the structure around himself, as if the act of construction was itself the point. The building was not a means to an end, it was the end, and that relentless vertical ambition is what killed him. Smith died falling from the upper level of his own structure. The precise circumstances are hard to reconstruct, but the building he had spent more than a decade creating became the site of his death. After he died, the mansion passed to his family, who have maintained it as a monument to one man's fixation on wood, height, and space arranged by rules only he understood. What the Smith Mansion ultimately represents is the moment when a private obsession achieves physical permanence and the uncomfortable question of whether the thing a person builds can eventually claim them. From this wooden tower in Wyoming, we move to a castle at the edge of the sea, where nature once took part of the building mid-dinner. Dunluce Castle was never taken by force, but it was destroyed by dinner. That contradiction sits at the heart of one of Northern Ireland's most dramatic ruins, and it tells you everything about the strange logic of this place. Number 10 on our list. Dunluce defeated the English crown twice, yet a single storm in 1639 did what 2 military campaigns could not. It ended the castle's life as a home.
The physical reality of Dunluce demands attention before the history does.
The castle sits on a narrow basalt stack, a column of rock that sheared away from the cliff top and now rises from the sea on all sides, connected to the mainland by nothing more than a wooden bridge over open air. The medieval walls grow directly from the rock beneath them, merging with the basalt so completely that there is no clear boundary between natural formation and human construction. The cliff is the foundation. The foundation is the cliff. The MacDonalds, one of the most powerful Gaelic dynasties in Ulster, built their power here precisely because the position was unassailable. When the English crown sent forces against Dunluce, the combination of vertical geography and fierce resistance sent them back empty-handed, twice. By the 17th century, the castle had grown into a sophisticated aristocratic seat. Banqueting halls, galleries, Scottish-style bartizans. Power had made itself comfortable on the edge of the Atlantic. Then came the storm.
In 1639, the kitchen wing broke away from the rock and fell into the sea, taking the servants working inside it during supper. The chronicles record their deaths plainly. Lady Antrim refused to return after that night. The family moved to Glenarm, and Dunluce was left to the wind and the slow patience of decay. What stands today still carries that open wound, the raw edge where the kitchen met the ocean. Basalt, ruins, and the drop below. The castle that no army could breach, undone by geology. A castle held out for over a year against an imperial army, and the army never once breached its walls. That is not a legend. That is the documented history of Predjama Castle in Slovenia, number 9 on our list, and understanding how it happened means understanding what kind of structure this actually is. 4 floors of Renaissance stonework are built directly into the mouth of a massive cave, 123 meters above the valley floor. The cliff does not stand behind the castle as a backdrop. The castle grows out of the cliff, and the cliff curves overhead like a roof. From below, the boundary between human construction and raw geology is almost invisible. That fusion was not just aesthetic, it was a military system. In the 15th century, a knight named Erasmus of Ludwig declared himself an enemy of the Austrian Habsburgs, raided their trade convoys, and distributed the spoils to local peasants. When imperial forces surrounded the castle and settled in for a siege, they assumed what armies always assume, that time and hunger would do the work. They were wrong. Behind the walls, a branching network of natural cave tunnels ran deep into the mountain, and through those tunnels, supplies kept arriving. Fresh food, fresh cherries, according to the most famous episode, which Erasmus reportedly threw over the walls and down onto the besieging troops below, a deliberate demonstration that their strategy was failing. The siege lasted more than a year and ended not through starvation or assault, but through intelligence. Someone inside the castle knew Erasmus's routine well enough to signal his movements to the enemy. A catapult stone found him at his most exposed moment, and that was the end. The cave tunnels are open to visitors today. The castle still sits in the same rock face it always did. What Predjama demonstrates, above everything else, is that geography, weaponized intelligently, can outlast almost any conventional force, and that the weakest point in any fortress is rarely the wall. Number 8 on our list is a building most people recognize before they can remember its name: Neuschwanstein. The silhouette Walt Disney borrowed for his fairy tale castle. The image the world decided, somewhere along the way, was what a real medieval fortress was supposed to look like. The irony is complete and almost beautiful. This building has never been medieval, never functioned as a fortification, and was barely used at all. King Ludwig II of Bavaria broke ground in 1869 on a jagged alpine cliff, not to house a garrison, not to impress foreign ambassadors, not to govern anything. He was building a stage set, a private theatre shaped by the operas of Richard Wagner, filled with frescoes of Germanic myth rather than actual history, crowned by a throne room that contained no throne. A concert hall that heard no concerts. Rooms finished in obsessive detail for an audience of one who almost never arrived. The cost was staggering. Over 17 years of construction, the project consumed roughly 6 million marks, enough to push the royal finances toward genuine collapse. By 1886, a committee of ministers and physicians had seen enough. Ludwig was declared mentally unfit, removed from power, and placed under custody.
2 days later, his body was pulled from a lake. Beside him lay the doctor who had signed the documents certifying his incompetence. The official finding was drowning. What actually happened has never been resolved. In the castle that took 17 years to build, Ludwig spent a total of 172 days. Today, Neuschwanstein receives around 1.5 million visitors every year, more people than lived in all of medieval Bavaria. A refuge built to escape the world became one of the world's least escapable destinations. The next entry on our list also traces back to the obsession of a single person. But unlike Ludwig, this builder never had a royal treasury to drain, not a single coin of public money. For 25 years, one of Belgium's most extraordinary buildings stood wide open to the rain, and nobody did a thing about it.
That is not neglect by bureaucratic inertia or lack of funds. It was a deliberate choice made by a private family and never publicly explained. Castle Miranda, also called Château de Noisy, after the village in the Belgian province of Namur, was built in 1866 to the designs of British architect Edward Milner for the de Liedekerke-Beaufort family, French aristocrats who had fled their homeland following the revolutionary upheavals in France. Milner gave them a neo-Gothic statement in stone: battlemented towers, lancet windows, soaring buttresses and, most remarkably, nearly 500 windows, which made the structure look less like a fortress and more like carved lace suspended against the Ardennes sky. After the Second World War, the building passed to the Belgian National Railway Company, which used it as a children's convalescent home and summer camp for decades. Hundreds of children spent their holidays inside its vaulted halls, largely unaware that they were sleeping inside an architectural manifesto. The camp closed in 1991. The de Liedekerke-Beaufort family reclaimed the property and, in a decision that baffled preservation groups across Europe, refused every offer from municipal authorities, private developers, and heritage foundations alike. The castle was left open to the elements. Roofs sagged, towers split, and rooms still bearing children's chalk drawings slowly filled with moss and rust. Urban explorers and architectural photographers made Miranda, ranked 7th among Europe's most compelling abandoned sites, the defining image of beautiful decay. Demolition began in 2016, and by 2019, most of the structure had been taken apart. Not restored, not stabilized, dismantled. What survives is a fragment and a question that never received an answer. From a castle destroyed by indifference, we turn to one consumed by its creator's obsession, Neuschwanstein, where the compulsion to build perfectly became a very different kind of ruin. Number 6 on our list is a Renaissance castle that is more underground than it is above it. That is not a metaphor. Château de Brézé in the Loire Valley of France sits above a tunnel network stretching over 4 kilometers in total length, all of it carved by hand into the tufa rock beneath the building. The chateau itself dates to the 16th century and looks, from a distance, like exactly what the Loire Valley promises: elegant stonework, formal architecture, the quiet confidence of old money. But what the exterior does not tell you is that the real infrastructure of Brézé was never meant to be seen at all. The dry moat surrounding the castle drops 18 meters straight down, the deepest dry moat in Europe, and that vertical cut into the earth is only the beginning. Below the moat and below the castle itself, the tunnels open into something that functions less like a basement and more like a self-contained city. Underground stables, bakeries with the capacity to supply 500 people with bread simultaneously, silkworm workshops, and one of the largest underground wine presses in the world, still operational today. The logic behind all of this was military and practical, a castle that could sustain a full siege indefinitely without relying on anything from outside its walls. Tufa made this possible. The stone is soft enough to carve, but hardens when exposed to air, which is why the entire Loire Valley is riddled with underground cavities. What makes Breze singular is the scale and the state of preservation. The castle has remained in the hands of the same aristocratic family for centuries, which means it has never undergone state-led restoration. No institutional renovations smoothed over the original surfaces. What survives is what was actually used. The contrast with the next castle on our list could not be sharper. Where Breze went down, that chateau went up, not to hide its power, but to make it impossible to ignore. It became the most recognizable castle on earth. There is a well in Portugal with no water and no bottom, at least none you can see from the top. That single fact is enough to make Quinta da Regalera number 5 on our list, one of the strangest properties on earth. But the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Sintra, the hilltop town outside Lisbon where the estate sits, was already a UNESCO World Heritage Site before anyone gave this particular garden a second thought. 19th century romantics had packed its slopes with ornate palaces and fantastical villas. Enough architectural theatre to earn the whole ridge collective protection. Quinta da Regalera earned its place among them in 1900, when a wealthy Brazilian-Portuguese collector named Antonio Carvalho Monteiro bought the property and spent the next decade turning it into an encoded monument to his obsessions. Monteiro was a Freemason, a Rosicrucian, a student of alchemy, and a devoted reader of Dante, and he embedded every one of those influences into the estate's design, with the systematic intent of someone writing a manuscript in stone. The centerpiece is the initiation well. It is not a well in any functional sense. It is an inverted tower, drilled 27 meters straight down through solid rock, with a 9-level spiral staircase running along its interior walls. 9 levels because there are 9 circles in Dante's Inferno. The intended experience was a ritual descent into darkness, followed by a return to light, symbolic death and resurrection, the core initiation sequence of several secret societies Monteiro belonged to. At the very bottom, carved into the floor, is a Templar compass rose. From that floor, tunnels branch outward in multiple directions, threading beneath the manicured lawns to connect the well with grottos, fountains, a chapel, and a second, smaller well. The entire garden is a single continuous labyrinth, most of it invisible from the surface. What looks like a pleasant afternoon walk is actually a 3-dimensional cosmological diagram built by a man who meant every inch of it. The estate coming in at number 4 also conceals its most remarkable features underground, though what lies beneath that property is far more pragmatic and no less astonishing. A decommissioned wartime structure became a sovereign nation. That is not a metaphor or a filmmaker's conceit. It is the documented history of the Maunsell Sea Forts, a cluster of steel and concrete platforms anchored in the Thames estuary, and the strangest footnote in 20th century maritime law. The reason any of this was possible traces back to a single engineering decision made in early 1941. German bombers were running low and confident over the estuary, and coastal artillery could not reach them from shore. Engineer Guy Maunsell's answer was to move the guns onto the water itself. Welded steel towers on concrete stilts, positioned 6 to 8 kilometers offshore, entirely outside conventional land-based jurisdiction. 2 types were built. Army forts, Shivering Sand, Nor, Red Sands, Tongue, comprised 7 interconnected towers per structure, linked by metal walkways above the waves, each tower serving a distinct purpose. Gun platform, searchlight post,
living quarters, command centre. Naval forts were single platforms. At peak operation, an army fort housed up to 165 personnel for months at a time, in conditions defined by wind noise, salt corrosion, and the constant low motion of a structure that was never fully still. After 1945, the forts were abandoned. The British military left them where they stood and did not return. That vacancy turned out to matter enormously. In the 1960s, pirate radio operators identified exactly what the military had left behind. Structures beyond territorial waters, beyond broadcasting regulations, beyond the reach of any court order. Stations broadcast from the platforms legally untouchable. In 1967, former Major Roy Bates seized Ruff's Tower, declared it the Principality of Sealand, and began issuing passports. The logic ran directly from Maunsell's original placement decision, rating 4 out of 5. Today, Red Sands still stands. 7 salt-blackened towers, original walkways intact, no inhabitants. Some forts carry heritage designation, others corrode without ceremony. What the estuary holds now is not ruin in any picturesque sense. It is infrastructure that outlasted every purpose it was ever given.
It took 66 years to build a fort that was already obsolete before the last stone was laid. That is the central paradox of Fort Boyard, number 3 on our list, and it tells you almost everything you need to know about the ambition and the stubbornness behind it. The fort sits in the open Atlantic off the coast of the Charente-Maritime department in western France, roughly 3.5 kilometers from the Ile d'Aix. It is an oval limestone structure, about 60 meters long and 31 meters wide, rising straight out of the water with no island beneath it, no rock shelf, no natural foundation of any kind. It stands on a submerged sandbank where tidal depths reach several meters. The sea surrounds it entirely. There is no way in except by boat. Napoleon Bonaparte ordered the project in the early 19th century. The strategic logic was straightforward. A heavily armed sea fort positioned between the ports of Rochefort and Aix would deter the British Royal Navy. The military engineers tasked with making it happen were considerably less enthusiastic. Their assessment was unanimous. Constructing masonry on shifting underwater sand in the middle of Atlantic swells was not feasible. You might as well try to build on open water, they said. They were right, as it turned out. Construction began in 1811, and almost immediately the Atlantic made its objections known. Completed courses of stone were dislodged by wave action. Foundations settled and shifted. Work seasons were short, interruptions were long, and the project lurched forward in increments that seemed almost to mock the scale of the ambition. The fort was not finished until 1867, and by that point, the threat it had been designed to counter had long since dissolved. The age of wooden warships was over. The fort had no military purpose, so it became a prison instead. The location made it extraordinarily effective in that role. Inmates were completely cut off from the mainland, and the surrounding ocean, deep, tidal, and strongly currented, made escape essentially unthinkable. By the end of the 19th century, even that function had ended, and the fort fell into slow disrepair. Its real second life came in 1990, when French television began filming the adventure game show Fort Boyard within its walls. The format spread to dozens of countries, Russia among them, and those yellow limestone walls, rising from grey Atlantic water, became one of the most immediately recognizable images in global television. Built out of military necessity, completed in irrelevance, and ultimately preserved by entertainment. Number 2 on our list should not exist. A granite rock rising 80 meters out of a flat tidal bay, crowned by a Gothic abbey, ringed by medieval ramparts, surrounded twice daily by one of the fastest moving tides in Europe.
Every element of Mont Saint-Michel defies ordinary logic about where and how humans choose to build. The tide is the key to understanding everything here. Twice a day, the sea withdraws several kilometers from the Normandy coast, exposing vast stretches of quicksand that look, from a distance, like solid ground. The causeway connecting the island to the mainland becomes passable, and for a few hours, Mont Saint-Michel sits at the center of a strange, temporary landscape. Then the water returns. It moves at up to 20 kilometers per hour across a completely flat seabed. No hills, no shelter, no place to climb. Medieval pilgrims describe the tidal bore as a galloping horse. People who misjudged the timing did not survive to describe it at all.
They drowned within minutes, caught on open sand with nowhere to run. That threat never went away. It shaped the architecture, the community, and the reputation of the place across 1,000 years of continuous occupation. Construction began in the 8th century and continued for centuries afterward, each generation adding upward because there was nowhere else to go. Gothic vaults cantilevered over the cliff edge, Romanesque crypts carved into the rock itself, a village compressed between the abbey walls and the shoreline. The entire structure grew like a geological deposit, layer by layer, driven by faith and by the simple scarcity of horizontal space. During the 100 Years' War, English forces repeatedly attempted to take the island. None succeeded. The tide did what walls alone might not have managed. Later, the same impenetrability made it a prison. Exile to Mont Saint-Michel meant total severance. Surrounded by water, cut off from news, from visitors, from the world. The site ranked third on our list shares two qualities with this one. It was built in defiance of water, and the engineers who attempted it were told the project was impossible. It also took more than 60 years to complete. A retired British Army major once fired warning shots at a Dutch vessel from a rusting steel platform in the middle of the North Sea, and technically, no law prevented him from doing it. That platform was Ruff's Fort, one of the Mornsel sea forts, and in 1967, Paddy Roy Bates had claimed it as an independent sovereign nation called Sealand. He issued passports, minted coins, and drafted a constitution. The reason this was even possible begins with an engineer and a war. Guy Mornsel designed these structures in early 1942 for one purpose: to intercept German bombers and mine-laying vessels before they could reach London.
The solution he built was remarkable in its bluntness. Clusters of steel gun towers mounted on concrete stilts driven directly into the Thames estuary and the North Sea floor. Multiple platforms per fort, connected by metal walkways swaying above open water, housing garrisons of men who lived with constant wave noise, metal vibration, vertical ladders between levels, rust consuming every surface, and a horizon that offered nothing but water and sky in every direction. After the war, the British government dismantled several forts, but left others standing. Removal was too costly and too complex. The abandoned platforms attracted pirate radio stations in the 1960s, since broadcasting from international waters fell outside any national jurisdiction. Then came Bates, who pushed the premise further than anyone else had dared. In 1982, German and Dutch businessmen staged an armed coup and seized the platform while he was away. He returned by helicopter and retook it by force. That sequence, coup, helicopter assault, successful recapture, happened on a decommissioned wartime gun tower in international waters, and it remains one of the more improbable geopolitical events of the late 20th century. Today, the forts are slowly being reclaimed by the sea that always surrounded them. Corrosion works through every bolt and weld with quiet consistency. Sealand still asserts its sovereignty. First on our list, and genuinely impossible to categorize as anything other than architectural madness born from war and inherited by the ocean. A man built a megalithic castle, alone, at night, using 10-ton blocks of coral, and no one ever saw him do it. That is not a legend. That is the documented, engineer-verified reality of Coral Castle in Homestead, Florida.
Edward Leedskalnin, a 5-foot-tall Latvian immigrant who weighed barely 100 pounds, quarried and erected over 1,000 tons of coral rock between 1923 and 1951 without a single co-worker, without cranes, and without leaving any written explanation of his construction technique. When asked, he said only that he understood the laws used to build the Egyptian pyramids. Modern engineers have studied the site extensively and confirmed one thing. By conventional physics, the construction should not have been possible for one man alone. The reason Leedskalnin built it at all is both simpler and stranger than the engineering mystery. His fiancée Agnes Scuffs left him the day before their wedding in Latvia. He was 26. Rather than move on, he spent the next 3 decades constructing a monument to a relationship that never happened. The castle contains a throne room, a bedroom with a north-aligned stone mattress, a functional celestial telescope, and a heart-shaped table, plus an empty chair he kept for Agnes until he died. There is a precise, almost clinical quality to the obsession. This was not grief spiraling into chaos, it was grief organized into geometry. The structure has survived hurricanes, attracted conspiracy theorists, and genuinely baffled structural engineers. What it has not done is answer the central question. Did Leedskalnin actually believe Agnes would come back, or did building simply give him a reason to keep going? Either answer makes the castle more unsettling than any haunted ruin. 13 castles, 13 stories about what happens when a human being decides that reality is negotiable. Leave a comment with whichever one hit hardest, like the video, and subscribe.